Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm Tony Lockwood and I'm delighted you have joined me on this latest episode. This podcast combines discussions with transformation leaders who openly talk about their experiences, both positive and developmental, along with recordings of the roundtable discussions that we host as part of the Transformation Leaders Hub, where we share and discuss best practices and world-class basics that you can quickly and easily deploy that will help you to deliver successful change and transformation. Please do subscribe to the show. You'll be the first to know about new episodes, and it really helps me to attract more guests onto the show for them to share their experiences with you. Scott Lockhart joins me on the virtual sofa today, and I'm sure you'll enjoy our conversation where we explore, amongst other things, the concept of servant leadership and how this approach improves performance and ultimately delivery of change. Let me introduce Scott to you now. Hi, Scott. Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm delighted that you can join me today. On each of these podcasts, or all the previous episodes, we tend to start with an introduction to you. So if you could just give us a quick potted history on your career to date, and answer the question how you first got into the world of change and transformation.
Sure. So I've kind of ended up being a leader my entire life. It's just something I've done. I've always ended up in roles where, even if I didn't realize it at the time, I look back and I was like, I was just kind of leading people and stepping into roles where it was needed. And that's really kind of the story of what I've done. So I've got a bit of an accent. I'm from Australia originally. I left home when I was 18 to move to the United States, did university in the United States, moved back to Australia and started a hardware store in downtown Sydney with my dad and worked with him on that for many years. Met my American wife in Sydney and then moved back to the States about 21 years ago now. So I've been here 21 years. And in that time, really, the career history has been a wild one. I ended up in a very small town in Missouri, three hours from any major city, and ended up finding a job as the computer guy at the only company that was a national company in this small town. Within 3 weeks, I was COO of the company. And, this was a nationwide appraisal company, so I worked in the real estate space. Worked there for just about a year until I managed to get out of there and move to Norfolk, Virginia with my wife. There, I sold swimming pools because you got to pay the rent somehow. And managed to find my way into a job leading a division of what now is called Dominion Enterprises. Back then it was called Trader Publishing. And it was a nationwide photography and virtual tour company. Did that for a while. Our biggest customer was Remax Greater Atlanta. Through the grapevine, I heard that they were looking for a CTO. Remax Greater Atlanta was one of the top 10 brokerages in the nation at that time. And huge, really huge. A lot of transactions, a lot of sales. So at that time, I got recruited to go down to Atlanta. And this is really where my adventure started in real estate, which is the industry that I've done most of my work in. Not as an agent, but on kind of on the technology side of things. Yeah. So came down to Atlanta, was at Remax, then ended up being a fractional CTO for a number of the largest brokerages, working with one of the largest lenders in the country. Then had some adventures in financial technology and consulting. So working for a company called North Highland, running the program where Wachovia and Wells Fargo advisors were integrated, and worked on that for a number of years. And then finally came back to real estate, where I now ran Showcase IDX up until recently for 11 years, with actually 2 successful exit events or acquisition events with that. So yeah, it's been a wild ride through different forms of leadership, and ultimately culminating the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years where it's been kind of a hockey stick curve of development for myself when it comes to how to build teams, build productive teams, and products that actually people want to pay for time and again.
No, great. Thank you for that, Scott. And I noticed the theme that was coming through this, and you started off you started off with the term leadership. It's been the common theme all the way through from that very early role with your dad and when you went over to the States. And I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, you talk about a proponent of servant leadership. Just want to explain a little bit about what you mean by servant leadership.
There's a few takes on it. My take is very much understanding that a leader's job is to not tell people what to do, but to help them do it. I think that the term that I use the most that seems to resonate the best with the teams that I work with and build is that my success is totally predicated on their success. So their success is my success. I, by myself, cannot be successful. I am just I'm just me. It's like having a head coach of a basketball team be expected to win all the games if he doesn't have a team that's functioning right. It's that kind of mindset. So how can I help other people be more successful? How can I help them develop their skills that is additive to the mission that we're on, that gets everyone on board and kind of carries us forward across the line?
I like the sort of sporting analogy. I use them a lot. Just taking that a little bit deeper, though. So how do you go about doing that? How do you go about getting that team in a place where they really believe you and don't just see it as nice words?
Sure. I mean, it's built over time. It's not one thing that happens at one point in time. It's not one single action. And that's where it's tough, because there's a lot of points which the rubber hits the road, and you have to deliver on the core values and the cultural tenets that you professed to embody, right? So one of my things was we grew the team in 2020. My company, Showcase IDX, was acquired by EXP World Holdings, which also owns EXP Realty, which is the fastest growing real estate brokerage in the world. Also in the United States, it is the largest by number of transactions as of last year, 2022. We grew the team from 5 people to 45 in about 18 months or so. And I was always the last interview. Doesn't matter what role it was. And really was a sniff test on cultural fit. And also to really go through what our culture was. And one of the things I did right there before they even started was, here's what we do. I want no surprises. So you tell me if you come in here and we don't do this, you need to let me know. And especially if it's me doing it, you really need to let me know. We didn't have any problems with that, because basically it was a challenge at the time. And we had some people who had really been on jobs, very, very talented people, really driven people that could never find the right spot. There was this one person we had, I think the longest they'd ever been in a place was 2 years, which was okay these days, especially people bounce around. We know that. But they said after they were hired, well, usually 6 months in, I'm already looking for my next job. I can tell you, I am so flawed that I came in here and everything you said sounded better than it could have. Like it sounded unreal, but you actually delivered on it. And that's how you build the trust. There's no like AI app or anything like that you can do and apply to it. It's basically, number one, being a genuine person and having that come across, and having that be something that you lean into and not actually shy away from, and seeing that as a strength, not a weakness. being kind and having some empathy there, especially even right up front in that first thing, and then following up with everyone like the week after they start, just like at the end of the week, like, hey, how's it going? Everything cool? Like, and then really what it comes down to, which embodies that too, but it's communication. And communication is the foundation for everything. It's why the larger the teams or businesses grow, the more dysfunctional they get, because communication breaks down. So it's understanding how you communicate, especially in a remote environment where you can facilitate conversations. Like, I don't have to be in every bloody conversation. I don't want to be in every conversation. That is not my job. I want to make sure that people are communicating, on the regular, have a framework for that communication, understand and learn, if necessary, how to communicate with their peers, and then make sure that we have a cultural underpinning that allows them to understand what the expectations of their role are, certainly the responsibilities and the accountabilities. But the expectation of communication is something that we added into kind of our job descriptions that really, really helped. Because we expect, if you see a problem, bloody well, tell us about it. If you have an idea, tell us about it, and we'll give you avenues to share that in a really constructive way. So at the end of the day, it comes down to communication, and good communication, consistently applied, builds trust. It builds authority, but the right type of authority. And I think that's where people think, oh, well, I'm a leader, I'm a manager, which I'm not a massive fan of that term. But you do develop authority, but really the authority is a reflection of the trust, should be a reflection of the trust that you engender and that you develop, not the fear. Because it's easy. Fear-based leadership is the easiest. Bad leaders use fear to motivate. It can be effective. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not going to say that I haven't judiciously or tried to judiciously use a little bit of negative reinforcement occasionally, when used well, to an extent that doesn't make someone fear for their family's livelihood. It can be good. It's like you can just, sometimes different people need a little bit of a different kind of nudge in a different way. But ultimately, the only way that actually works is coming back around to trust.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and totally agree with you. I think that ability to build trust within teams, whether it's a team that you're working with, whether it's a team that's in your community, whether it's your family team, it's critical, and it takes time to build, and it's very quick to break. But setting those expectations right up front about not what we expect from you as a team member, but what you should expect from me and us as your team colleagues is really interesting, because, as you say, it then opens up those discussions, doesn't it? Opens up the avenue for them to highlight deficiencies or things that are not necessarily meeting their expectations. And as long as you go through with that and make it reality, and not just bat them down as soon as they raise an issue or a challenge or raise a point, that will very, very quickly build that trust, as you've evidenced, which is really fascinating. And I think if you take that into the context of a change and transformation program, one of the big issues that I found in my career is that, as someone who's leading the change or leading the transformation, there is a natural distrust within the wider business, because the first thought is, what's going to be impacts upon me? And that ability to be open and communicate openly is something that, and I've certainly seen is a real differentiator with between programs that are successful and programs that are not. Which comes back. Sorry, go on.
I'll just hop onto that point just very quickly. Is you mentioned change and transformation, but I think where the trust, all that is great, but actually having people understand what that change and transformation is, what the vision is, what the strategic objectives are, how you're going to get there, doesn't have to be how you get there doesn't have to be answered just by the quote unquote leader. No. That's why you have a team of people who can contribute. But I do think that where a lot of these teams, a lot of leaders really, especially some of the leaders that I've dealt with in my career, where they have had a shortcoming is they think if they say something once, it's enough. And they're like, well, I told you once, that should be enough, right? And like, yeah, that's really cool if you are a leader that doesn't want to get anything done. But people don't listen, like for the most part. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, but they really don't. It takes a bit of time to get things into people's heads. So to the extent they are, like, it's not just me talking about these cultural tenets, it's the entire team. It could be someone who could be perceived as the lowest rung on the ladder is actually the person who's the foundation of a lot of how we act, and and seeing that person use these cultural tenets to rise as well is really, really cool. So anyway, I just wanted to add that because I do think that is one of the things that is missed. Is
I agree.
Typically, I had to say something until I was sick of it. Like if I'm starting to feel like I am being a broken record and just repeating myself over and over again, I probably just started to get the message through. So I need to probably continue to go through.
Absolutely, totally agree. And having that consistency of message is critical.
Oh yeah.
Because people will. I totally agree. It takes a lot of time for people to get that understanding or that acceptance. So you need to communicate regularly and have a consistent message. But what they will pick up very, very quickly, I find, is inconsistencies in that message. And that can very quickly derail a program. But one of the things that you were just saying there brings me back to that sporting analogy, really, because the best sports the best coaches in sporting teams always put out on the pitch a whole team of leaders, and it might be a leader in soccer or in football in the UK, might be a leader from a defensive position or from a midfield position or from a forward position, and it's the ability of those leaders to actually deliver that message on the pitch when they've left the changing rooms. There's a book where England won the 2003 World Cup in rugby, and Sir Clive Woodward wrote a book called Winning, and he talks about this very core element of his success was having these leaders with each part of his team, and he would call them and treat them as this leadership team. So you can do that. Yeah. You can put it into a business context or a program context, but fundamentally, what he was saying and what you're saying is exactly the same. It's not necessarily you. You have, as a leader, you have to give that consistent message, but actually, there are key people within the business on the pitch, shall we say, that will have the ears and eyes of a lot more people than you ever will. So having those on board in understanding and bringing those change agents through, I find is critical.
And I think it's just a mindset, organizational design mindset. And it's one thing to be able to like draw up a cool looking org chart. It's another thing to see how those pieces interact. So I completely agree. I mean, to use that sporting analogy, which does hold true. The one that is very cringe for me is the family analogy. Terrible analogy for anything. Like it just doesn't work. And it's actually, I'm not sure. It's probably not too far off in the UK. No, it's not far off in Australia, but certainly in the United States. It's disingenuous to call it a work family. Like it just, to me, it always just is super cringy when I hear that, because It's like the company's going to do what's the best interest of the company at the end of the day. And if that means laying off some people, you just don't lay off a whole pile of family unless they really deserve it, right? Like, it takes a lot. It's just a different kind of paradigm. Whereas the team, and when you're in the lead, like the captain's seat, so to speak, like my role was always head coach. That's the way I had assistant coaches who are my execs and my VPs. And then we had, like you said, then we had players, and we had a couple of player coaches who are good too. But we wanted to encourage the players to play.
Yeah.
Like, just let people play, but give them these skills that show them how to play more effectively, develop their skills, practice. Also, a big part of my job was therapist, was the psychology of work, and working with individuals who are, some were struggling, some were doing really, really well, but still had anxiety. I mean, I think in this modern day, especially leading, so I'm solidly Gen X. I am like in the sweet spot of Gen X, which no one talks about right now, which is great. But like in leading Gen Z, a lot of it is way more important as well. Like being able to break things down so you can work through these generational differences, which there are, and create a framework in which people can work in where they feel really secure, and that you reduce anxiety. And because anxiety is a real thing these days, and people get it over the darndest things. Like some offhanded, like kind of jokey little thing I'd say could be 6 weeks of someone freaking out low key that I don't even know about until I do. And then it's like, oh shit, oh, that was terrible. Oops. But creating an atmosphere where people feel like they can talk about that kind of stuff really is important. And the psychological aspect of leadership and being able to talk with the team and having one-on-ones, not just with your direct reports, but really taking the time to listen across the team, no matter how big it is super important.
Totally agree. And it's interesting, a colleague of mine from way back, sort of 25, 30 years back, he always used to say, what was the phrase? Nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. And that stayed with me so long, because as a leader of a team, whether that's a small operational team or whether it's an organization as a whole, if they don't feel that you care about them, bringing it back to what you were just saying, and what matters to them, they won't be interested in you and what you know. So it's making, as you say, it's making that connection and being open to have those discussions, isn't it?
It is, and I do think that no one's going to care as much as you do. If you're leading a team, if you're a founder, or even if you're leading a team, no one should care about the whole as much as you do. Number one, you just have to kind of come to terms with that. But where a lot of leaders that I've seen and coached actually struggle with is bringing people along. And there's one truism in human nature, which is kind of the law of reciprocity. Humans will give what you get. It's the old golden rule, right? Like, what people feel like you've given them, they'll give back to you. So if you give them peace of mind, and if you give time for them, you're more likely to have them closer to your level of caring about things than you otherwise would. Where it's like, hey, welcome to your job. This is your job. And it's a job for most people. I mean, everyone has family and all kinds of stuff that goes on in their life. A job should not be number one. For some people, it is. For leaders, probably people who are listening to this podcast, more folks like this are thinking, hey, this is it's kind of bumped, like 1 and 2, maybe a little bit fuzzy at times, but the job should not be. And that's something that I've certainly, especially over the last 11 years of running this company as a small startup, and then being bought by a public large multi-billion-dollar company, really that's really hammered that home in a really big way, meaningful way.
And the lesson there, I think, is one where whoever you're talking to, whether it's the newest member of staff, whether it's the first member of staff that you've had in and they've been with you for 20 odd years, or the group chief exec of the acquiring business, that you always look at things through their lens and look at and stand in their shoes to look at the discussion or the issue that you're looking or discussing, because sometimes we can all get fixed in this is our world, these are our issues, this is the way that I'm seeing things, and you get fixed in that mindset, don't you? Just stepping back in, looking at things from a different perspective is so powerful, and can unlock, I found, can unlock so much real value in those subsequent discussions, and can unlock a lot of issues and challenges that you'll go face at some point in the future. Gives you that ability to move forward a lot quicker.
So I think you touch on some things. Two things. One is mistakes. Guess what? They're going to happen. Yeah. Some are going to be bigger than others. Some are going to be really painful. Most are going to be kind of things. But creating it's obviously we don't want mistakes, but they're going to happen. We know they are. That's going to be from miscommunication most of the time, and there's a number of reasons why. But really demystifying, or what we really tried to do was take the sting out of admitting that you made a mistake, so that people would actually admit it. Then layering on top of that a systematic way of doing retrospectives and actually building that into our cadence of work. So as we're doing projects, hey, we're to a milestone, let's make time to go back. Hey, what have we done? What didn't go well? Let's make sure that that's documented, like in the code repositories, all that kind of stuff. If it was on the engineering side, but what are the lessons learned? What are we bringing forward? That, so just as important to obviously identify issues, but also celebrate wins and all that kind of stuff too. To me, I was always much more interested in the mistakes and learning from the mistakes and not repeating those mistakes than the wins. I actually get a lot more of a sense of achievement, and like where I get kind of my juice from is actually fixing things. There's a lot more satisfaction that comes from that, for me anyway.
I was at an event last week, and we started one of the points that we were talking about was these project reviews, post-project reviews, or part-way reviews, as you're going through key milestones. And the general feedback, there was probably 12, 14 different organizations represented in this at this dinner. And probably the general feeling was that these type of reviews were done inconsistently. So they've been planned, but events take over. So in some cases, they don't get done. But when they are done, the general feeling was that very rarely do the lessons that have identified then get embedded into future projects or future activities, because events take over. It'd be interesting just to get your experience of how you've actually got that and then started to embed those lessons in future. What process did you go through?
Sure. So I mentioned kind of this framework. and that's what I apply to a lot of different things, whether it's a marketing initiative or if it's a software project or building out a feature or something like that. And it really does apply across the board. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And the way we did this was really just build this into the expectations and the process that we had for everything else. It is not a luxury. It is a core part of how we develop as a team. And I'm really, one of the things I'm super proud of is taking that time, improving the team. There's going to be people who they're worried about the next thing. They're worried about the next thing. If you are in a leadership position, you have a valve on that. You can turn up the heat. You can turn down the heat. You can make time for that. The key is consistency. Is like, you just have to be like, why didn't you do that? Like, that's bad. Like, you have to make time for that. Because the majority of, I mean, this goes into so many other things about the, having, a valid meeting schedule and people not just being, meeting all the time, but not actually getting any work done. I think it falls back into a bit of that. It's like, you have to develop a cadence for work and a cadence for communication that is, in this modern day, far more ad hoc. It's trackable, it's searchable. So we use Slack a lot. So we use Slack for 99.5% of all of our communications internally. Email for outside, but certainly for outside of within our group, Slack for everything, because you could search it, you could do all this kind of stuff. And we encourage people, hey, don't wait for a meeting days away from now. Just talk to someone. It's fine. It's like, maybe they're not going to get right back to you because maybe they're busy, but you're going to get to far faster than if you actually wait until the next meeting when you're meant to talk about it. And then it's about having, and this is certainly a work in progress, because it takes a lot of really getting people to not phone it in, and to actually take the time to prepare, but get people to ascribe to a series of meetings and a collection of or an understanding of, this is how we meet as a team. This is how we meet as a whole team. This is how we meet as smaller groups. Whether it's a daily stand-up for an engineering and product team working on a certain product, that those were really limited. We got those down to under 10 minutes. They were bam, 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 bam. Everyone knew what was going on. Let's get on with our day. Like, we had a all hands meeting on Monday afternoons, where it was expected that people put in some time. It would probably take about an hour or two to actually prepare. And we had two formats for that. One was an analytical meeting. So we were going through KPIs, OKRs, all that kind of stuff, for the different groups, and the different initiatives that we had going on. And then every other week, it was more of just a narrative, hey, this is what we're up to, kind of thing. Apart from that, there was not that many meetings. Like, we tried to keep people's calendars pretty wide open. And it's amazing. Like, I worked with a lot of software engineers. They can have 4 standing meetings a week and still complain about having too many meetings. And I'd be like, please. But you have to make space. You have to understand the different roles in the company that you have. And if someone's like an engineer is in too many meetings that they really don't need to be in, it could be literally a Slack message or an email. Like, and then, but also collectively giving everyone the permission to kind of call that out when they see it. Because if you're in a meeting that sucks, you know it. Like, it's like, why am I here? You're not actually in the meeting. You're probably over here on some other screen doing some other things and all this kind of stuff. Like, why are we here? And so we really tried to really focus on agendas and making sure that there was clear expectations for meetings, clear outcomes. It's cool to have a little bit of a chat in the beginning, because especially being remote, we didn't want it to be all like, I mean, we certainly were anything but like robotic about it. But like once you get into it, you're into it.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of chat and kind of hang out at the end if you finish early, which we usually did, unless we really got into it. But also giving people the permission to really get into it. There's and it's a real fine line. So it sounds kind of antithetical to what I just said, which is like agendas. But it's also knowing when to break your own rules.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you're into something, you've got people, it's like, no, we're talking about this. Let's grab this person. Hey, are you available right now? Yeah, come into this conversation. Shit, if we can figure out something in 2 hours that otherwise would have taken 2 weeks, potentially 2 months, based on, oh, well, this person's out and then this person's in, and we're going to have to wait another few days to have this conversation. Nah, let's get it done now. Everyone's going to feel good. Let's get the conversation done now. If there's a decision to be made, let's sleep on it. Let's just, like, there's going to be a point person who's usually a product manager in our role, but sometimes it was on marketing, but there was someone who owned it and they knew they owned it, right? And it was their job to kind of come back and say, is everyone cool with that? Cool. All right, let's go.
I think
and that just, it works.
No, it's interesting, Scott. I think there's 3 lessons I've taken from there. One, that ability to establish the non-negotiables. As far as you're concerned, it's a non-negotiable. We will have review meetings. We will assess what we've done. So it's a non-negotiable. So putting those non-negotiables in and making sure everyone adheres to them. 2, being clear about what the meeting is and why we need it, and not just have meetings for meeting's sake. I think that becomes a bigger issue the bigger the organization. In my experience, I've been in so many big global businesses that have meetings, preparing for meetings. It used to be prepared for a meeting, but I've been in a few recently where it's almost 2 or 3 meetings before the main meeting, and that becomes cultural. People just get into that routine. And the third one,
sometimes it's hard, but yeah, you're right.
And the third lesson is that, and I was linking it to procrastination, but that ability to, if you've got an issue and you need to, and you've got an opportunity to resolve it by bringing someone in immediately, don't procrastinate and say, "Oh, we'll set a meeting up at some point in the future." Get them in and take action there and then, because there's nothing quite like getting things resolved there and then, because that builds that momentum very, very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things rarely get better if you ignore them, right? And whether that's interpersonal relationships, it's being able to have really honest, respectful conversations with people if they're not getting along. One of the core tenets, one of the things we used to talk about a lot, because it's important, was API, assume positive intent, and it's something that that was introduced to us, quite a few years ago now, and assume positive intent really, honestly, changed the way I thought about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What that means is, if you think someone's screwed you over or done some kind of slight in some way, usually that's you making that up yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's, like, for the most part. There's some people out there who are just dickish, and they're just they're not nice people, and they get off on screwing with other people. Those are the people I'm not looking to hire, number one. So typically everyone on our teams would be like, we have a clear vision of where we're going. We all want the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not in my best interest to screw you over because we want the same thing. We may be talking past each other.
Yeah.
We may be not communicating well, which is usually what it comes down to, because someone's having a stress reaction to something in their lives. It could be from work. It could be something. And the way they showed up on Zoom one day was a bit like dismissive and like didn't want to listen. And even the best teams, everyone has their days. I have my days when I'm just like, I'll come across poorly. Well, what people know is, like, that's an outlier, and assume positive, but deal with it too. And I'll have people like from across the organization, and we were quite flat, but we were and we weren't, like, come up and be like, "Hey, you okay today? Because you seem a bit off." I'm like, oh, thanks. Oh, yeah, I'm actually having a bit of a rough day. Like, oh, what do I do? What do I done? And they're like, oh no, it's not a big deal, but I could just see you're a little sniffy. Usually you'd be a little bit more understanding and like you're a little bit more like sniffy today. I'm like, yeah, I mean, and even coming from me, like having folks on my team come to me and do that for me, it felt great. Like, when does that happen? That doesn't happen a lot. So assuming positive intent, making sure that everyone understands that, like, our individual success is predicated on our collective success. So why it's not in their vested interest personally to screw you over. And I mean, I've had this conversation many times over my career. It's like, why would they want to do that? Like, I think there's something there. So we actually did a thing. It's called the Birkman test, Birkman. And it's not necessarily a psychological test or, like Myers-Briggs or any of those kind of ones. It's a communication profile. And I was always very, very against it. I was hilariously not for it the longest time, and I thought, oh, I don't like doing this. It seems like intrusive, and it just doesn't, like, does it actually really help? And a lot of them don't, right? Just knowing kind of your letters of whatever psychological test doesn't actually help you communicate with someone. What I found with Birkman, and everyone who joined the company would do a Birkman. It wasn't mandatory. Like, if someone really pushed back, I wasn't going to absolutely force it, but I was like, trust me, it's going to be really interesting for you and probably your partner as well, if you have one, to do this thing. And really, we used that, and we actually had a consultant do an hour a month workshop, a communication boot camp workshop, where they would come in an hour every month. It was an all hands thing. Everyone had to be there. And basically, we learned how to identify how we communicate, how to identify how others are communicating, see what their baselines are, being more aware of how you listen and how you take in at the time, and then work with people. So getting the foundational pieces of that and really helping the team develop. I'm really proud. Like, a lot of folks made, I mean, everyone really made a lot of progress over the years that we were doing that. It was great because they were getting better skills. So when they choose to be a leader in management, quote unquote, or just as they get more senior in their roles, they're going to have more sophisticated conversations and have to understand how to communicate with someone, to read them, read the situation, and to react in a way that benefits everyone and not just not a reaction. And which is honestly one of the bigger problems that I've seen in leaders. They do all this, they read all these books, all this kind of stuff, but the foundational piece of communication still is weak, is fairly weak.
I agree. And something you just said there made me sort of remember a piece of work that I got involved in years and years ago. And it's something that I've tried to implement with the teams I've been leading since, is what was called then commitment-based management. But it was fundamentally, if I ask you to do something, or we agree on a work schedule or an activity, if you think you can do it, tell me, say you can. And if you think you can if it's going to take you 4 days, we agree 4 days. But I don't want you to agree 4 days just because you think I want it in 4 days. I want you to tell me whether or not you can do it in 4 days. If it's going to take 6 days, tell me now, because if you agree to 4 days, you're committing to deliver it on 4 days, and I don't want you to commit to something that you don't feel that you can do. And it took a little bit of time for people to sort of get into that frame of mind. And it was down to that trust element. It was down to that open communication bit. But once you did it, stuff just flew through, because people could have this real understanding that actually, if I tell you that I'm going to deliver something, Scott, you can plan, because 99.9% of the times it will get delivered. There's always the exception. Shit happens.
Yeah.
But, you could really plan as opposed to lots of plans having lots of contingencies in, because we all know that things are not going to get delivered on time. It made it a lot smoother, a lot quicker. And part of that was about communication. Part of that was understanding and listening to people when they say they're going to do it in 4 days, but actually something inside says, you're not really committing to that, are you? You're not really, something tells you that perhaps it's not going to be 4 days. Challenging them back and having that discussion, as you're just saying, critical.
So there's multiple sides to this, where you have the potential for people to sandbag and add more time. What I've found is it usually goes faster than in most cases. Like, it's probably the old 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, things actually get done faster because there's less barriers and less friction for people to get things done. 20% of the time, guess what? You screw it up. You screw up the estimate. There's something you don't know. Usually it's just a lack of planning or deep planning. They haven't gone deep enough to find out all the factors that could actually go into doing a task or initiative or whatever, building a product. There's obviously scope creep that goes into that too. There's all these factors that come into it. But at the end of the day, moving fast should be the goal. I would much rather say, hey, I want to do this thing. I think it's going to take 4 days. Mm-hmm. I've researched enough that I can get started on it, but I'm just going to go. Yeah. And we can think about this. And certainly there's different things, different projects at different levels that require a lot more planning and careful things, but a lot of them don't. Yeah. A lot of these things are smaller things. And what I've seen is teams really break down. It becomes a trudgery because they're planning the next planning meetings, and it's all planning, noting, because they're having meetings about something that really could have been the right people jumping on a quick call. This is what I'm doing. Documenting, which is, I think, the other part of that supports all this, is in terms of a foundational piece. As much as communication is foundational, even underneath that is documentation, and making sure that people have something that they can actually point to, that is in writing, that all the stuff that we've talked about in this podcast is in that document. Yeah. Is there. So that is, to me, really, really crucial. So documenting things enough and then trying it out, prototyping, testing, excuse me, rapid prototyping. And that's just not a product thing. That's not a software development thing. That's anything. Get out and try it. Yeah. See how it goes, and then come back to me. If you said it was 4 days, it ends up being 8 days, and there's reasons, I'm good with that. Yeah. If there's reasons, because it was always going to take 8 days, you just screwed up on the estimate.
Absolutely. Scott, great conversation. I've just noticed the time. It's always a good sign that you lose track of time. So always a good sign. We tend to finish these podcasts off with a standard question. And that question is, if you had to sort of boil down all your experience into one core takeaway today that we can leave the listeners with, what would that one takeaway be for you?
Leadership, organizational change, transformation is predicated on one thing, and that's communication. Work on communication. Yeah. That's it. I mean, it's as simple as that.
I would have been surprised if you'd said anything else after the last 50 minutes of conversation. So once again, thank you very much, Scott. It's been delightful to have you on the pod, and good luck. Cheers, Scott. A great conversation, a typical no-nonsense Aussie-style discussion. I'm sure you'll agree. I trust that you have found this episode insightful, and my wish is that you have found at least one nugget that you can take away, consider and deploy into your life, both business and potentially personal. This show is sponsored by the Transformation Leaders Hub. an exclusive community for those working in change and transformation. If you wish to check out the community, please go to www.thetransformationleadershub.com and sign up today and join your peers from around the globe. If you've enjoyed the show, please do subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating. It really does help us to share the message with a wider audience. Also, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or indeed thoughts on a future episode. My contact details are in the show notes. Once again, thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing more episodes with you in the near future. Bye for now.